Welcome back. Well, today I am joined by Dr. Fred Alamshaw, who is here on behalf of Kaiser Permanente. Well, Dr. Alamshaw, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Lisa.
Well, you're welcome. Now, I understand you are the Chief of Family Medicine out of the Kaiser Permanente Yorba Linda medical offices. And, people can still come to the medical offices, even though they are here in Laguna Woods, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, closer to Laguna Woods, we've got Mission Viejo. We've got a variety of Kaiser Permanente locations. There's 14 in Orange County service area. So welcome to come to any one of those.
Okay, excellent. And right now, what we're talking about is hypertension. And boy, I think that can start pretty much at any age. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We have, unfortunately, a pediatric generation that, from statistics, are less healthy than we were 30 or 40 years ago, meaning life expectancy is actually, for the first time in the world's history, the life expectancy of a younger person is not what we've historically had, meaning we basically have always had an increase in life expectancy. We've now seen a decrease. So I think childhood obesity, unfortunately, plagues our pediatric population, and hypertension is an outcome that we actually are now seeing in our pediatric patient population requiring medication. Obviously, first thing is always lifestyle change, but for those that we can't, we do need to even consider medication.
Gosh, that's disturbing. I mean, that's really frightening that our children, like at what age? Are you talking about middle school or high school age?
That's a great question. For peds, we generally aren't as aggressive as we are with adults, but we can look at our statistics and we can say, is a kid at the 99th percentile? And if they're the 99th percentile, that's generally a bad outcome. I would probably say, junior high to high school is when we're going to start to see some of these children kind of roll into higher blood pressures, unless they've got some congenital abnormalities. But for the average child growing up, maybe plagued with some obesity, maybe some lifestyle changes, maybe not, as active, not on the playground, so to speak, maybe doing more TV time. Unfortunately, this is a disease that, will catch up to you at any age, to be quite honest.
Well, yes. And what's interesting is I was actually having this conversation not too long ago with someone that we were talking about how many years ago there was a big push to change diet for some of our middle school and high school kids to help to alleviate some of those things.
Yes. I mean, diet is absolutely important. And I think, later on during this conversation, if we are talking about hypertension, I'm sure we're going to be talking about diet and some lifestyle changes. So we'll
Exactly.
save that.
Well, exactly. Now, of course, most of us, have been on a lockdown situation for the last year. And I think we have tended to be a little lazier than we would have normally because gyms closed and there were so many things that we couldn't do. So what did Kaiser Permanente do to help, treat people and see them for hypertension?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As I'm starting to see my patients face to face, I joke about the COVID-19, just kind of like our college 20, so quite a few people have, maybe gained 19 pounds during this lockdown. But going back to the lockdown, this was an important time. This was the first time in our history. This is probably in my medical career, the first and only pandemic, hopefully, that I'll ever see. But with respects to safety and patients not coming in, we actually flipped the switch back in March and we started doing home blood pressure monitoring, and we started to really get aggressive with home blood pressure monitoring. And in fact, we got lucky. We were ahead of the curve by about 3 months, because in June, we actually had HEDIS and NCQA, some of our national guideline type of organizations, that actually said home blood pressure monitoring was okay. And we could actually use the home blood pressure monitor in lieu of those patients coming into the clinic or to the medical office building. So obviously, as we knew during this pandemic, people were nervous. This is prior to vaccinations. People did not want to go out of their homes. They did not want to get infected with this COVID virus. And so we actually leveraged our own physicians with home blood pressure monitoring. We also had, as you may imagine, during this furlough of physicians, Kaiser Permanente never furloughed a single physician. We actually found meaningful work for even some of our surgeons who weren't doing elective surgeries. We actually had them reach out to our members with historically high blood pressure. So we are really aggressive at Kaiser Permanente. We had a list of about 2,000 patients who we knew had uncontrolled hypertension going into the pandemic. So we reached out to those members, and we're very successful to get to those members and have them monitor their blood pressure. And I think one credit in Orange County was not one of those patients ended up in the emergency room during the pandemic for complications of hypertension. So again, doing the home blood pressure monitoring, I think, was paramount to our success and for keeping our patients safe. I mean, that was the most important thing. Our patients were nervous about coming in, and yet they had a disease, a chronic disease. As you may or may not know, there takes about 38 patients. We use a term called NNT, or number needed to treat. And for every 38 patients that we have under control for hypertension, that's one less death that we have. So if you look at that list of 2,000, it doesn't, we may have prevented 10 to 15 deaths during the pandemic just from complications of hypertension.
So when you say home monitoring, is it literally the patient is monitoring and you've shown them how to do that?
Yes, so that's a great question. So a lot of these home blood pressure cuffs, and we generally have one that we generally try to promote at Kaiser Permanente. It goes above the elbow, goes on the arm. It kind of mimics kind of the level of the heart. And again, any of these home blood pressure monitors, if patients know how to do it, fantastic. If they don't, we can schedule them for nurse clinic. We can walk them through the process. I think there's, really good manuals about that. Again, you want to keep it right above the level of the elbow, and then you go ahead and document that. And now that we can actually use home blood pressure monitors as a legitimate, valid data point, we can put that into their medical record. So it becomes part of their home permanent medical record. We just put in the comments it was a home blood pressure monitor, but again, this is now accepted by NCQA, by HEDIS. So I think we've actually made a step in the right direction, because when you talk about hypertension, you always hear about this quote, white coat hypertension. I'm wearing a white coat. Maybe 20% of the population, they're nervous of their physician, or they're nervous coming in. Hopefully they're not nervous of their physician, but, we're well aware that there's always been, patients who will come in and say, doctor, I swear it's 150/90 when I see you, but it's 110/70 at home. I promise it's always under control. I don't want to take the medication. Well, now we can actually look at some of these home blood pressure monitors, and maybe we can avoid the diagnosis of hypertension. Maybe they've got an elevated blood pressure just because, I make up that they're a little bit nervous coming into our office. And, I always joke around with my patients, if they've got an elevated blood pressure, I'm an old school physician. I like to take it manually, and I always do it at the end of the visit. And almost always those blood pressures do tend to come down. Their problems are addressed, their chief complaint is addressed. Maybe they were nervous that, their sister or aunt got cancer and that was on their brain. And, once we talked to them and figured out that maybe they don't have the same risk factors and they don't have the same history, and then they're generally at ease, I generally take that blood pressure at the end. So again, the home blood pressure monitor almost mimics, hopefully you're comfortable at your home. It's a safe place. It's a safe environment. You're not necessarily stressed or emotionally stressed. And then that blood pressure could be accurate. And again, our goal is not to really medicate our patients. Our goal is to take care of our patients, but we also know if we can't get there with diet and lifestyle changes, we will, use the necessary medications to get you controlled, again, with that number needed to treat to prevent that stroke or heart attack.
So that's really great to know that you're able to have people do it out of their home. Now, one thing I would say, it could be a good, bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now you can do it at home, but don't do it all day long.
That's a great question. And I think, sometimes we have some patients who are just monitoring their blood pressure every second of every minute of the day. At least that's what we make up. You know what? Taking it once a day is more than adequate. For patients who are under control, I tell them take it 2 or 3 times a week. No more than that. Otherwise you'll get neurotic looking at your blood pressure. It fluctuates every second of every minute of every day. And there's no reason to get so worried and wound up about your blood pressure. And, we all have patients. I have my engineers are generally my most meticulous patients, and they've got the best documentation of their blood pressure at this time and at this moment in time and what they were doing. But at the end of the day, these are raw numbers. These are average numbers, and we like trends. We like to see where their blood pressure was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year ago. The nice thing in our system is patients come in, and I joke with them. Maybe they came in for sinusitis and they've got elevated blood pressure, and they always downplay that their blood pressure was, well, no, it was okay before. And then I can actually go back and look at the last 20 years and I say, well, you may say that, but here's 17 points of your blood pressure greater than 140/90. Let's go ahead and just make that diagnosis. Again, my goal is to try to keep you alive. I don't want you to be alive paralyzed on half side of your body because you had some kind of stroke based on not controlling your blood pressure, also known as the silent killer.
Yeah. Oh gosh, for sure. Okay. One last thing. What is the best way to lower your blood pressure? What are some things people can do?
So diet and lifestyle is always important. Exercise is probably the biggest key. Exercising every day will always help lower your blood pressure. We talk about sodium. So sodium greater than 2,400 milligrams on a daily basis is probably going to get you into a higher blood pressure situation. Unfortunately, during this COVID pandemic, some of our patients have gone back to smoking. Smoking will always raise your blood pressure. Alcohol will also raise your blood pressure. So again, some of those dietary lifestyle modifications, and clearly if those don't work, we also, ultimately have medications that we could use for blood pressure control.
Right. Thank you so much for the clarification and all the great examples. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be right back after this.